In the U.S., while we're the second largest online university, we pride ourselves on a mission of being affordable, so we just can't spend the money that the University of Phoenix and some of the other large online institutions do. But we were actually founded in 1991, and we operate through two institutions, both online, American Military University and American Public University. And American Military University was our original school. We were founded by a retired Marine Corps major who, during his 27-year career in the U.S. military, continued to try to seek to earn a master's degree. And the pattern of employment in the military was that every 3 years, he was a Marine Corps aviator, he would be moved to another base, and the U.S. military bases contract with local institutions to teach courses on bases, but they teach the most popular courses, so business administration, criminal justice, those types of programs, and he was pretty stubborn and wanted to get a master's degree in political science. And what he found was he would have to go off base to take a course, enroll in a program, and then when he moved from South Carolina to California, the institution in California wouldn't accept any of the credits transferred from the institution in South Carolina, so he'd start all over again. And in 27 years, he did not earn his master's degree, so he decided upon retiring to enroll at George Mason University in Virginia, and wrote as his thesis the idea of starting an online. The internet was at its nascency, and really to put together an institution that the student could stay enrolled at no matter where they were in the world, and that was our beginning as American Military University. We're accredited by the Higher Learning Commission, which is a regional accrediting body out of Chicago, Illinois, and is the same accrediting body that accredits Notre Dame, the University of Illinois, or in our home state of West Virginia University. We offer today nearly 100 degrees, from 2-year associate's degrees, 4-year bachelor's degrees, and master's degrees. And as Paul said, we have over 100,000 active students. We're 100% online, and our courses are taught asynchronously because of our percentage of military students who are studying with us in over 100 countries, trying to coordinate a class to be synchronous at the same time with students in Afghanistan, South Korea, South Carolina, England, Norway, or elsewhere is pretty difficult. So while we allow our faculty to arrange for synchronous sessions in a particular class, they have to arrange for it to accommodate all of the students. So as a result, most of them are taught asynchronously. One of the things that we started about 12 years ago, which was pretty unique at the time, we found that our students, based on their assignments, really weren't interested in the traditional trimester or quarter system. They really wanted to start a course whenever they wanted to, so we offer monthly starts. The first Monday of every month, year-round, we'll start a traditional 16-week semester or an accelerated 8-week semester. The content's the same. The difference between the two is how much time you have to complete the work. To give you a profile of our undergraduate students, and by the way, of the 100,000 plus, it's actually about 113,000, I think, at last count. 20% of those students are graduate students. So, but I think what we're going to talk about this morning is mainly our undergraduate student profile. Almost 92% of those students were part-time students in 2013. And this next line is really a measurement that's used in the United States. So those of you not from the U.S., the United States government measures graduation rates based on first-time, full-time freshmen. And so we have 113,000 students. And last year, the number of first-time, full-time freshmen at our institution were 84. A few years ago, we had 26. So we've grown. But you can tell that this is not our typical student, but it's actually how the U.S. government measures our graduation rate. And a few years ago, when we had 26, someone said to me, you know, you ought to pay them to graduate. I thought that was a little unethical, but it was kind of funny, particularly the idea it wouldn't have been too expensive to pay all 26 of them to graduate and then say that I have a 100% graduation rate. So our graduation rate can fluctuate incredibly based on this measurement. And one year we had a 19% graduation rate. Our current graduation rate is 48%. But from my perspective as the president, it's a graduation rate for these students is totally irrelevant because they really aren't who we seek as students. We're seeking working adults who study with us part-time, and at the undergraduate level for a bachelor's degree can take up to 10 years to graduate. Almost half of our students transfer credits from previously attended colleges, or in the United States, the American Council on Education evaluates military training for college credit. So they've been doing that since 1947. They have a fairly good expertise, and if you're a career enlisted man or woman, you can earn almost 45 credit hours towards 121 credit hours for a bachelor's degree if you attend all of the training courses that have been evaluated by ACE. At the same time, when we get a student, we don't usually get someone who's near the end of their career. So our average credit hours, or our mean credit hours in the transfer requests are about 34 credit hours currently. And about 80% of our students receive less than 60 credit hours. So half of our students transfer in credits. The mean credit hour is 34, but most of the people are below 60 credit hours, which is the equivalent of an associate's degree. We began looking into MOOCs. Actually, the story goes back to Dr. Ice and I were presenting an education conference in Lisbon, Portugal in 2010, and we heard one of the presenters, George, I think it was Alex Quaros, talk about the first MOOCs that were being done up in Canada, and the fact that you could sign up for free. And we said, wow, this sounds kind of interesting. And he had just completed a MOOC with about 800 students. So we began looking at MOOCs and how they were done. As we'll talk about a little later, and it's really not my place to talk about the MOOC sector in general, but we said this bears further investigation. Let's look at this. Our average class size is today 16 students for undergraduates and about 11 for grad students, and we cap our enrollment in a section at 25. And we really do this because in best practices in online education, the engagement between the faculty member and the student is pretty important for persistence. I wouldn't say that we have the scalable model, even though we have a number of efficiencies by having 100,000 plus students, but when you cut that enrollment down to 25, it's much more important for us to lose some advantage of scalability and not have huge class sizes and make sure the students can persist. We looked into them, debated them, studied them, looked at the evolution that we'll talk about in a second, going from smaller courses in the hundreds in Canada to courses offered by Stanford and others with more than 100,000. And we said that as we looked at the MOOCs and the evolution of the MOOCs, we looked at them primarily more for marketing. As an institution that hasn't raised its tuition in 13 years, because we could, we scaled, we increased our enrollment at a time when online education was becoming more important, and from our perspective, affordability was very important, particularly for our students who were serving in the military. So we just held our tuition. The last time we had an undergraduate tuition increase was 2001. Which is very different probably than most of the institutions you've either attended or worked for. But we said this is an opportunity to extend our brand, to market ourselves, that if we hold a course, that we advertise it, it's free, and we put it on a particular topic area in a particular program, we can demonstrate the expertise of the faculty that students have access to, as well as our expertise in the online arena. and said, but beyond that, if we were actually going to educate people, that we thought that there needed to be a lot more work done in looking at the technology, looking at the ways of engaging the students before we were sold on MOOC offerings would be the wave of the future and how to do online education. As I mentioned before, if you look at these factors, the Canadians, Cormier and Alexander, coined the term with Downs and Seaman, and it was really their first courses were an extension of the open resource movement. Coursera, edX, and Udacity were the ones, particularly Udacity with its artificial intelligence course that had an initial enrollment of about 161,000 people out of Stanford. And the moment that course was completed, Sebastian Thrun resigned from Stanford and started Udacity, thinking that there was a business plan there. By the way, I teach entrepreneurship, and I've yet to see the business model that the MOOCs offer, but maybe they'll figure it out one of these days. An average of 33,000 students enroll in every MOOC that's been offered, and 3 to 8% completion rates are the norm. The current large entities offering MOOCs are Coursera, edX, and Udacity. I don't think I need to go over too many things. Coursera, I'm an alum of the University of Pennsylvania. Penn is one of the shareholders of Coursera. The Coursera schools have offered courses to 5 million plus students, 532 courses, 107 partner schools, students from 190 countries. Very few students have paid the $100 option for getting a certificate with a proctored exam, but that is one of Coursera's offerings. edX is a joint venture of Harvard and MIT, and perhaps Berkeley is now a participant in that. They've had about 1.65 million students, 125 courses, 30 partners, and 200 students from 225 countries. And then Udacity, which seems to be tweaking its model a bit from its earlier large-scale model with the artificial intelligence program. Udacity has about 1.8 million students so far, but if you've recently noted, they did some experimental programs, one at San Jose State in California, where they took some gen ed courses and tried to see if they could get better outcomes teaching large section classes, and then most recently with a master's degree at Georgia Tech in engineering, where the tuition is heavily subsidized by AT&T, who's a partner, and their goal is to enroll 20,000 students in that master's program. And I think it was interesting when it was announced, one person commented that Georgia Tech has offered that degree for 50 years, and they don't have 20,000 alums, so to have 20,000 enrolled through the Udacity MOOC program would be a coup. Lastly, just to show you the breakout for the MOOCs that we know of that are available, about 1,200 courses, a good 20% are in humanities, and then the technical split out, social sciences, engineering, math, and stats, a few in education, health and medicine, science, but a pretty broad distribution. And I think with that, I'll ask Dr. Powell to come up.
So the philosophical basis and some of the assumptions of the MOOCs, I'm going to talk about some of that from a learning perspective, talk about how do you work with a large population of people, whether that is crowdsourcing or not, and talk about some experiences we've had at APUS around experimenting with the methodology to engage larger audiences than the size of the population that Wally talked about with our average class size. We've gone from doing our average class sizes of 14 to 15 with a maximum of 25 to now expanding into some things. So some of the reasons for doing this and why the MOOCs have gained popularity is it opens a wide wealth of shared resources at a very low cost. So individuals can participate in these MOOCs, the ones that have been offered by Udacity and the various institutions, at no cost to them, But at great cost to the individuals creating it, because you have to create a quality product in order to engage the audience and the learners in the environments that you're doing. So they're providing a high quality educational experience, and I would question whether it's really an educational experience as much as a knowledge transfer experience at no price to the participants. It's the concept of there is a master lecturer. So places like Stanford and MIT and Harvard are taking their big lecturers, the big known names, and putting them on video and engaging a larger audience and with those experts. And a lot of the engagement, and you'll see when we talk about our experience with the one MOOC we did, the asset quality, so the quality of the videos, the quality of the materials they're putting in those various learning environments directly impacts the engagement and the continued engagement of the participants in the learning process or in the course. The learning goals, the learner goals, I would say, are intrinsically developed. There is nothing that is evaluating their goals, but if the learner has to choose to stay engaged in it. It also assumes learner self-efficacy, that they're going to stay engaged. They want to be there, they want to learn, they want to do it, but there is really no formal assessment in this methodology for what to do there. And it aligns with objectivist orientations of learning. So there's a lot of things that are out there that need to be paid attention to. Oops, I don't think I know how to use your computer. I'm not an Apple person. Sorry. My bad. That button only? Mm-hmm. Okay, I can do that. All right, so APUS decided a couple of years ago, so we have 2,500 faculty. Our faculty are all remote. They are across the globe. We have about, of the 2,500, about 450, 500 of them are full-time, the rest are part-time faculty. In the last about 2 years ago, we wanted our faculty to learn the Community of Inquiry framework, which is the framework we use for evaluating our learning at the end of a course, at the end of a program. It's the faculty evaluation, and there are 3 presences: social presence, teaching presence, and cognitive presence, that Phil will talk about in a little while. We wanted to engage our faculty in really owning and understanding what those 3 presences were, and we needed to do it quickly. And you know, if you do training seminars and you invite the faculty and you can do 20 to 25 at a time, it's going to take us a long time to get through 2,500 faculty. So we created what we called a small MOOC, or a community course, to engage all of them in a 3-week period. We had at that time 1,800 faculty, who we divided into 2 cohorts. So we did 900 of them at one time and 900 at another time. They were divided into 70 study groups. What we figured is that all of the lessons for the major week were similar across. So there was a community place where the lessons and the lectures, and sometimes we used Adobe Connect and sometimes we had video, but there was an engaging piece of information for all 900 to be online together at one time, listening and participating in that way. And then everyone was assigned to a series of small groups where they talked about and engaged each other and contributed back to the community what they were learning. I know I facilitated one of the small groups in the first round, and I had 40 faculty members in my first group. And I think the interactions and the posts were in the realm of 1,000 postings per week that we were reading back and forth. So there was a great exchange of ideas and information, a little overwhelming to have to read and facilitate and manage that, but a lot of information generated at that time. The faculty at that time said to us they felt more engaged in the university. They felt it was a way they could contribute their thinking in a large way, so sourcing them as a contributor when they feel sometimes disconnected because of being at a distance. Even though within their schools and within their programs, the faculty will be connected there, the connection with the university as a whole and the contribution to thinking about a philosophy of teaching and learning engaged us in new ways. So that was our first entry into what we called a quasi-MOOC or a small MOOC using the methodologies. We did it on our own platform, which our learning management system is Sakai, which is an open source system. So we set it up in that system and set up the communities for people to meet there as well. Our second venture into a MOOC, we have a course, International Relations 492. And we worked with the Policy Studies Organization and Paul to create a course called International Politics in This World and Beyond, Wizards, Fiction, and Political Fact in a Global Age. We played with Jedi Knights, we played with Harry Potter and Wizards, we played with all kinds of imagery that is very current and made connections to international relations. We used for this MOOC, which was one that was offered to the public, we developed very high-touch professional videos. The faculty member who was the lead did excellent work in building documentaries, which when you hear the results of what engaged people, that was the most engaging piece. Students worked in self-formed working groups to develop video projects, and for those who chose to complete it, there was credit for the exams and an essay, and you'll hear the results of that in a minute. So we started with 1404 in terms of enrollment. So we did this is who came to us. So we didn't have the 150 or 160,000 that Stanford or others did, but we had 1,400. In week 1, 528 of those individuals actually logged in. So there was great interest because of the trailers and the advertising we did. 520 logged in, and I'll show you a chart in a minute that shows you how the students steadily dropped off over time. And when we evaluated as we went along and at the end, students loved the content. They loved the platform. They ranked higher social engagement in many ways than and collaborative learning experiences than some other MOOCs reported in terms of statistical results. The MOOC persistence. So you'll see here from week to week. We went from 528 course participants in week 1 down to 48 in the 8th week, and this was an 8-week course. Forums are the discussion boards, places where the high interaction is. We went from 401 or 76% participation down to 17 students participating or 35%, which was really interesting to me. In week 5, we had a 94% participation rate. So people were staying engaged, although it was declining significantly. The exam participation, at the end of each unit, there was an exam or a question, and this is how many completed it, so that in the end, 19 of the 528 actually passed the course for the MOOC and would have been eligible to pay $100 to get 3 credits if they then go complete the essay exam. To date, we have 1 person who has paid $100 and is working on her exam. So in terms of learning and engaging in the learning environment, the question of MOOCs as a way to do that is questionable. Some of our observations, persistence is clearly problematic. You know, people staying with it and engaging. The social engagement in the forums was low. People came. What was really interesting for us in terms of the findings, there is a statistic for the amount of time a learner stays engaged with an asset, and we exceeded that time. So most of the time for the videos and that, at 50% of the asset, they'd cut it off. Of all 8 weeks, we had almost a 90% completion of watching all the videos. So the videos clearly were a strong part of what people were there for. They really liked the documentary nature of them and the engaging and the way the themes of wizardry and that were woven into the various presentations. Satisfaction among the completers, very low number, was very high. We did a survey at the end, very high, loved it as an engaging experience for themselves personally, but did not see that as a place for contributing to knowledge and learning. So how satisfied were the non-completers? We don't know. They didn't complete. We don't have their feedback. We can go and survey them, but we don't have that. Did they get what they wanted when they came here? Did they feel they contributed something? And how then, the big question for us is in terms of engaging and learning, how do these differences here compare with the traditional classroom or the traditional, what we've been to a number of conferences lately, and they're starting to call traditional online classrooms, which was a new one for me this past year to hear that one. And how does that impact behaviors as we work with these large populations? You know, with 100,000 students, how do we reach them, engage them in new and innovative and creative ways? And is this, you know, what can we learn from this to take to our other classes? And so right now we are building a general education political science course that will be launched as a MOOC in middle of January. We are going to be paying attention to who enrolls in that, and will the students who engage in that actually want to complete and do the exam work and the work to demonstrate their learning to be eligible for the credit. So those are some questions that we're playing with. And Phil Ice is going to talk about how we think about this in terms of multiple modalities of learning and what it means for the future.
Thanks, Karen. So, we see MOOCs as the face of online learning right now. Whether or not that's a correct assumption is a whole different matter. But MOOCs are the flavor of the day. They're what is getting the attention in the press. It's what's driving innovation, if you will. And it differs so dramatically from what we call traditional online learning that we really need to stop and think about what we're doing. Now, the phrase, as Karen pointed out, traditional online learning, is a bit humorous if you stop and think about it for a minute. We have, at least since Bologna, we have the university as a concept that has been with us and has changed very little in the way that students are educated over the centuries. Now, we have online learning, which is a rather recent invention. And what do we really know about how people learn online, and how do they learn in, especially large groups, in a MOOC? Well, we don't really yet. But what we do know is how they learn in smaller groups in what we call traditional. And as a bit of a point of reference, the very first course that's identifiable as being taught online as a complete course came without having discs sent out in the mail. I'll make that caveat. Whether you're actually using a phone in a cradle on a 12.2 baud modem, came out of the New Jersey Institute of Technology in 1984. That was the first identifiable online course. It was taught by Starr Hiltz and Murray Turoff. And from that time, the evolution was rather slow. And it was painful. You were operating on the old bulletin board services. 1994 is when I put my first course online. It wasn't mine, but I helped put one online called a project called RuralNet, which allowed for continuing education for teachers in rural parts of West Virginia to be able to take their course credits. It took a major grant from the National Science Foundation to West Virginia University to do this. The entire thing was written on software that is Okay, you'll date yourself immediately if you recognize the names of these software. It was written with Archie and Veronica on a Gopher server, and we're using Fortran for the compiling on the back end. So the few people in the audience who smiled when I said that or were trying to hide their smiles just dated themselves as badly as I did. But we built that, and the equivalent of what was built for that one program is less than the equivalent of what one online course would be today. The completion time to build it was 18 months, and $2.9 million in NSF funding went into it. And from there, this was still built on the old BBS system. But whenever we saw the first web browsers, Mosaic and so forth, emerging, people started becoming a lot more inventive. Still wasn't easy, but we started building classes online. And by 1999, the first grounded theory in what is an online learning environment really came about. And it came about out of the University of Calgary with Randy Garrison colleagues and his graduate students, who in and of themselves have become names that most of you may know in the literature of online learning. George Siemens was one of Randy's students. So wasn't Terry Anderson, Liam Rourke. They were early on in this, and they brought together all the conceptual framework that we know about learning science, along with what we know about technology-mediated learning. Now remember, even though we didn't have online education, we've had distance education and technology-mediated distance education, with the earliest instance that I'm aware of being 1904, whenever the Australians broadcast out to the ranches and to the cattle stations public schooling over shortwave radio. So we've had distance education at least that long from a technology-mediated perspective, longer out of the envelope. But whenever they started thinking about how people interact with technology and how we learn optimally, a lot of the very constructivist school of thought came into play, especially Lippmann, Dewey, Vygotsky, and the whole idea that when we learn best when we learn together, because we all bring something to the conversation, regardless of our level of expertise. If we are engaged in the learning process, we bring something to the conversation that will help modify the cognitive schemas of all other learners. And it does this through processes like classic Vygotsky and scaffolding. So from this, Randy and his grad students developed the conceptual idea of a community of inquiry. And it served as the basis for what a collaborative constructivist experience would look like. It introduced the ideas of scaffolding and looked specifically at the interaction of instructors and students and content and how these fit together. And you see this represented in the diagram with teaching, social, and cognitive presence being the three germane elements. Now, the reason I'm going down this is not to be pedantic on giving a lecture on what is underlying psychology of online courses, but rather this plays into how we look at what's going on with a MOOC and how we need to leverage other frameworks moving forward. So they developed this, and teaching presence is straightforward. I mean, this in and of itself is an hours-long discussion, but the 40,000-foot overview is that teaching presence is the teacher interacting with the students. Social presence are how students in a course interact with each other to form learning communities, and cognitive presence being the interaction with the content. This went from being a theoretical framework to, in 2005, Randy and then 7 others, myself included, started taking a look at this and saying, can we validate it? Is it more than just theory? Are we actually seeing this in the numbers? So we worked with a lot of end-of-course feedback, transcript analysis, etc., and applied a lot of mathematics to see if it was holding. Just as a note, all the appropriate factor analyses, structural equation models, and multidimensional scaling did in fact bear out the theory. and we've developed an instrument against it at that point to show that it does indeed work as expected. So we know a lot about the social interaction in a class, and we know that it has all these outside influences, from externalized content to what each individual brings to the class. They're all part of the learning experience. And this is what we call the traditional online learning experience. And again, to Wally and Karen's point, these are classes of 16 to 20 students, because that seems to be the optimal threshold at which interaction occurs. Any more than that, and the instructor is not having sufficient time to interact with the students, and the groups get too big for the students to interact with each other. Now, in contrast to this, we have a MOOC, which is really a closed set, so to speak. As with traditional courses, MOOCs do have set, open, and closed dates. But because of highly distributed geographic learner base, MOOCs differ from traditional courses in that you don't have the sense of cohort or community. Now, granted, we have in our courses at APUS, we may have students from all different time zones. It's not inconceivable that of 16 students, all 16 could be in different time zones. However, whenever I speak of geographic proximity, it is more than the physical proximity. It's the fact that these students come to a MOOC from a community somewhere that is not part of the university. So you see a different kind of geographic assembly here, and you'll see students coming together for a MOOC, and then they go back out into their communities when it's done. And they only spend a finite amount of time there. One of the other things about MOOCs, knowledge has a definable origin, and it's not really contextualized for these learners. Now, this may seem like a very fine point, but when we start dealing with the idea of cognitive presence and how students interact with the content, a lot of times, one of the things we see in MOOCs, for instance, you saw the stats from Coursera, edX, etc., anywhere from 190 to 225 countries served. This gets to be very problematic because regardless of how hard we try to develop a learning experience and how hard we try to internationalize the curriculum, each of us comes at course design with an inherent bias that is a function of our culture with it. So a MOOC developed in the United States, for instance, even things around language, simple vocabulary, differs from what you find in British English or South African English or the quote-unquote international European English that's spoken just on routine business, or the English that is spoken in Southeast Asia for business varies wildly. And a lot of the items that we may reference do not have the appropriate contextual significance to be readily recognized by participants from other countries. So whenever you take this, you start to see some of the inherent problems in the way that content is viewed, the way that the learners are coming together and then disbanding. And we really have a differentiation problem here in a MOOC between knowledge acquisition and learning. In the previous slide, I talked a lot about the social basis of learning that underpins the community of inquiry framework. Now, certainly that shows a social paradigm in which learning is a shared activity. However, in a MOOC, think about it for a minute. You have 33,000 students. How many of you have ever been in a lecture hall in your undergrad programs where you were one of 600 or more students, or 300 or more? Okay, we have a few of those. Maybe not as prevalent in some universities, but I can assure you in the States at almost any large institution, flagship or state institution, in your freshman year, you will be one of 600 to 1,000 students in some universities. Now, a MOOC then is really becoming the world's biggest lecture hall, if you think about it for a moment. In that, what is the content within a MOOC? Within a MOOC itself, you have, if you look at Stanford, edX, Udacity, they engaged in what is one of the cardinal sins of online learning. They took a video of an instructor speaking for 50 or 90 minutes and put the entire thing up online. You can't deal with somebody speaking in person for that long without people starting to nod off, let alone putting it online. Or it just becomes a constant yawn fest whenever you get to that point that people pay no attention to it and they start to fade off cognitively. And there's no interaction, there's no opportunity to interrupt the instructor and ask questions. So you are indeed in a MOOC in the world's largest lecture hall, and you're basically back to the freshman paradigm of large-scale learning again. So we think about this, and we think about a couple things. There's too much emphasis on the traditional teacher-centric model within a MOOC, the sage on the stage, if you will. And again, they're transposing the lecture from the physical to the virtual. And if it's a bad lecture in person, it's going to be even worse whenever you put it online for an hour and a half. There are a few strategies built in to MOOCs where you can have sustained conversation with your peers. If this were a university course and I were your instructor, whenever you left this course, unless it was later in the day on Friday and you were heading directly to the pub, you would be leaving this course and having some type of commentary with your peers about what you had just experienced. Either a significant point that I'd raised, or how terrible of a job that I had done in conveying information, or something of that nature. But you would still have those conversations. Think about it, in a MOOC with 33,000 people, what strategies are built in to have that kind of interaction? And there are few, if any, at present. However, the opportunity for re-engineering this is enormous. Online learning has really gotten a second wind, if you will, we went through a period of growth for the last decade in online learning that has been astronomical. Whereas the traditional face-to-face university many years was growing at 1-2% or less. Online learning in some of those years, enrollments were growing at 20 to 30%, to where in the U.S. 1/3 of all course registrations are now for online courses. But it's also plateaued and those numbers have stopped. But the MOOC has really grabbed the imagination of the public, and they are large scale, so we have a chance to do something here. Now, what can we do? So, based upon the literature of what we know about large scale data and just some of the things around pure vision, I'd like to propose some things that we think could be done. And these are all primarily involving, to align with the theme of the conference, how we can use crowdsourcing as a mechanism to help re-envision and rebuild the MOOC. So, if we think about this, instead of the MOOC being this platform where we have the lecture being pushed out to the students and very dry, objectivist activities, what if we could think of it as a knowledge base? Okay? And I use the Wikipedia icon here because Wikipedia, for better or worse, is an incredibly good knowledge base. And especially with the expert review mechanisms, even though it does receive a bad reputation in the press, Wikipedia is actually pretty accurate. in a lot of cases, or it's a good starting point to locate primary resources from. And admit it, I don't think there's probably a person in this room who hasn't wondered about something that they hear as a term. They Google it, the first entry that comes up is Wikipedia, and you go to it. I'm sure everybody's done it at least once in this room. So it is a knowledge base. And what if we took this idea of a Wikipedia type environment and the topic or topics that were the focal point of a MOOC, what if instead of being taught from one semester and then stopped at the end of the semester and then restarted, what if the course itself was taught with the same primary resources in it, but you had a knowledge base that persisted across all semesters, where students and faculty alike could enter their thoughts, enter more information about the topics that were being discussed, add to the facts as new data emerges, as new discoveries emerge around any fact. What if the MOOC were just a means to catalyze a knowledge base? That would be one way that I can see where we could reinvent what a MOOC is. It's the catalyst for greater learning, not being learning in and of itself. And it's leveraging the power of the thousands of learners who come to it. And of course, mining what all the interactions involved with that knowledge base through effective KM management. I mean, from a technical perspective, something like, if anybody cares, like Metastack Overflow or something like that, where you could grab tons of data off the back, would be so cool to work with on the back of a knowledge base attached to a MOOC. Content as a reflection of community, and this is building on the idea of a knowledge base, but we have content that's generated by the primary instructor. We have addition of community knowledge base, like I just talked about. Now, in addition, think about what happens, though, whenever people add to a knowledge base. Is anybody in here an expert reviewer on Wikipedia? Okay, I'm the only one with no life then. I am. There is a community behind Wikipedia of expert reviewers on a topic. And we have discussions on discussion boards that you can actually access and see what the experts are talking about. Because anytime a correction is made or an addition is made to Wikipedia now, it doesn't immediately update. The experts in the background have to approve it before it gets updated. And, the areas that I'm in, are not really all that controversial. I mean, the latest in structural equation modeling in the social sciences has maybe one edition a year. So it's not like a hotly debated topic. But whenever you get into the wiki entries on politics, those things are like fire. They're on fire every day. And the expert reviewers have a lot to talk about. So you see all the commentary going on in the back on those review boards. And the public is also welcome to inject comments in there too. And this is yet another way to think about the iterative peer review and refinement that goes with it, is public interacting with experts in these forums that persist along with the knowledge base itself. And utilization of most current learning resources. Again, this goes along well with the idea of a perpetual knowledge base, but think for a moment, if you will, about what we could do with wikis and what we could do with MOOCs. Let's take the MOOC for a moment that might center on any given topic. Doesn't matter what it is. Poster board design. Matters less what it is. But assume you have the knowledge base, assume you have the community around it discussing. Well, not everybody who's interested in poster board will be part of the community or involved in the knowledge base. But they will be doing things. They will be creating new designs, new materials. And where does this appear? inevitably, somewhere it will be picked up on the web. So, what if we took the human element from the knowledge base and the iterative review and supplemented it with web crawlers? What if you had federated search that took a look at a specific topic and had dedicated crawlers to go out and ping the web in the same way that Google does to update its indexing? And you did this on a regular basis and bring back information to the community. So you already have a knowledge base built, you have iterative review, but what if there's something that the community missed in this? How cool would it be for a crawler to come back and say, hey, everyone in the community, I found something new. Now, would you humans care to vet it and add it to the base? That's pretty cool. And it's possible. It's with us now. Now, let's get back from the web crawlers to something a little more human. Learner control. Whenever you think about the way that we interact, and the fact that we might put a discussion board in a course, a discussion forum in a course, and it is there from the time that course opens till the time that course ends, and then it goes away. That's rather an abomination in my opinion, because you've basically killed a community of learners that has existed. That community dies whenever that forum gets shut down. What if you had resources that already exist out there in social media? Like, think about Facebook groups for a minute. Does anyone here use Facebook groups? To an extent? Okay. So if you're using Facebook groups, what if you had a group on Facebook or in any other type of media that was dedicated to a certain topic? Or what if your group on Facebook could be introduced to new topics coming in from the outside? And what if that same group existed in a course? So you have two or more entry points into the same content, but it's viewable from different social structures. Now, so in other words, Facebook, you might be part of a very large group and 25 people might be in this course, but you're basically evangelizing what you've heard in this course to everyone else in your group, and they're seeing some of the active discussion, and you can even bring people in from your group back into the course. Now that sounds like a good hypothetical, right? Well, guess what? The software already exists. That's actually a screenshot of it that's doing it from an application called GoofMe that was just developed by some very young entrepreneurs. And it does exactly that. It laces Facebook groups back and forth with any course content through just a very simple RESTful services integration with the platform. It also, one of the things that comes with learner control is teacher dashboards. For better or worse, I think that Rate My Professor and things of that nature are one of the greatest things that have ever happened. Because, and we all did it. Think about whenever you were in school, before there was an internet. We all met informally, or if you belonged to a fraternity or sorority, you were told which professors to avoid, which were terrible, and which were on the blacklist, and which had tests that went into the fraternity test file. Yes, they exist. We all know that. But we knew all this. Well, all the things like Rate My Professor are today are an extension. And it no longer becomes, the professor rankings no longer become the secret of the closed societies. It's now part of the public imagination. So we have that as actually part of learner control. Assessment at scale. This is fun. Whenever you think about the non-quantitative assessments within any large course or ultra-large course like a MOOC, it gets to be very problematic. Quantitative items, multiple choice, they can be machine graded all day long. Even a fill in the blank, machine gradable. The minute you start getting in to short answer and essay, it starts to get problematic. You either have to rely upon a small army of teaching assistants or auto-grading software. The auto-grading software is making some progress, but I still have my reservations about it to actually see it in action and working with a high degree of reliability. So we have assessment problems there. However, think about one of the ways that we can leverage the power of the crowd and the power of social networking to help us grade. Think about that last example that I showed you, where you have posts that are existing in a course, but also exist within a Facebook group that might have tens of thousands of people associated with it. Now, Facebook groups will not let you do this. They'll let you do the like, but they won't let you do the unlike, but that app will. So think about a net promoter score. The minute you post up something, that it gets the up or down thumbs, and the net and the aggregate score that's derived from it gives a value ranking from the community to anything that a person writes, and determines whether something should be valuable and promoted to the rest of the community, or even elevated to part of the knowledge base. These are ways that we can leverage the power of the people, of the students, to help federate assets and to help build more powerful learning experiences. Because if something is useful to 90% of your peers, it might be useful to you too. And we know that if we can average the value rankings. Social network analyses, which is way cool and one of my favorite things to play with, looks at the relationship between dominant individuals and dominant players in any group structure to find out who, without even getting a value ranking or a ranking from the community, we can tell from social network analysis who the leaders in any community, any online community are, and who they affect and who they don't impact. And if we use those same things as faculty, we can start dynamically developing groups with leaders positioned with peers to create optimal learning interactions on the fly through self-forming groups predicated on SNA. And this is done, by the way, with Twitter and Facebook all the time. 24/7, Mark Zuckerberg and the guys at Facebook are figuring out how to do this to tell you what groups you should join. So the basis is already there. And then there's also the idea of proposition linkage to help with assessment. This is a little more complex, but within every, it has a lot to do with classic philosophy, but every concept must have several propositions that support it, okay? And you test each of those propositions to determine the validity of a statement in classic philosophy. Now, what if an instructor, of course, provided a set of propositions, some of them being true and some of them being false, with a terminal objective, and then how well the student linked the propositions together to form the argument around the central points of the course. This is a way to take non-quantifiable, to create a non-quantifiable assessment at scale. It may sound a little, Byzantine on the way it's done, and certainly would be, but one of the best test cases to see how feasible this is would certainly be philosophy, since it is a classical philosophical technique. And the last thing, I'll get it. This is where I like to have fun. Semantic analysis and crowdsourcing semantic analysis. This is something that we did at APUS, where we're trying to look at all the goals and objectives for courses in our College of Business and match the content up with the goals and objectives, something that's usually done by hand at most universities. Here we used a latent semantic engine. It's basically a JCR repository, and then overlaying it is a set of algorithms that use a technique, if anybody cares, it's called Dirichlet analysis out of the field of fluid mechanics. And it's used to deprecate natural language into binary structures. So it's converting whole sentences into a series of ones and zeros and matching up keywords and key phrases. So it's not just a keyword search, but it is a phrase matching tool that will break down natural language and then compare it to the similar binary algorithm, the similar binary structures that are inherent in the goals and objectives. With a little bit of training from a human, we got about a 92% accuracy on being able to match content back to goals and objectives using all machine processing and latent semantics. The problem is, though, with latent semantic analysis and the semantic web in general, is that semantic engines are like babies. You have to teach them as they grow. You have to be the parent to them. And it's painful to go through and find what is right and where there's a good match and where there's something missing. But think about it for a minute. Let's take the idea I had about the web crawler going in and trying to find new material. And there are something on the order of like 500 and some new web pages that are created every single minute. Not pages, sites. Websites are created every single minute of every day, 24/7. So we have so much knowledge out there that we really don't know where a lot of it's coming from or what it is. Even experts in the field not always current. So what if, in addition to searching, before it even comes back to the group, the crawler goes out, picks up stuff, brings it back to a semantic engine, says here is what is possible. The semantic engine says, oh, these are good, this one can go. And then the community tells it, okay, why these are good resources or what they aren't, or why they aren't. What you're doing is changing and modifying the rules and schemas to power semantics by giving it almost human-like intelligence through the refinement that you're getting. You're getting really close to AI at this point. If you're training semantic engines through all these rule injection sets coming in. And if you do that,
and then I felt, well, with the example of Sir John Murray, that we had crowdsourcing for many decades. We didn't have technology. Now we have technology, and it opens up all kinds of crowdsourcing opportunities. And I was, final observation about all this, I was so impressed by the technology they mounted on this MOOC that they ran. I mean, I couldn't conceive doing it or anybody doing it. And, these people did it faultlessly, and there were chat rooms and things dropping down and everything else. And I wondered, and I still wonder, if it is going to be possible for everybody to do this. The American public can do it because that's its stock and trade. It's an online university. But in America, we have between 4,000 and 6,000 universities, and some of them are not going to be able to do this. They won't have the resources. The faculty may want to do it, but crowdsourcing needs resources, or it's just a flat, uncooked fish. It doesn't do anything. So I have an awful lot of conflicted thoughts about this. I think it's all good in a way. We'll all work out in the end, I think. But I do know we all have to get up early and worry about it a lot more than we have, because I take it that everybody here, I see some professors and others, everybody here has a stake in this. We have skin in the game. And we don't want it all going by us like an express train, and we're going to be at the station at the wrong time. Well, at any rate, I'd love to have your comments directed to the panel. and just wave or gyrate. Yes, sir.
It's really interesting, the concept of having community-generated content. But in terms of looking at this picture from the perspective of the employer, let's take something traditional like, I don't know, nuclear safety. I guess an employer wants some kind of standardized, certified knowledge from the people coming out from a university system. So how do you cope with this kind of distrust that they may have toward this system? How do you convince them that actually the kind of knowledge that people will have getting out from this trajectory is according to to their needs?
Wally?
Well, I think that just let's start with a program. So if we had a program in nuclear energy or something related to that, nuclear engineering, we utilize both our faculty and industry advisors, which are large employers. So to give you a specific example, we have a degree in strategic intelligence, which is spying, and we use the 16 U.S. government three-letter agencies to help advise us on non-classified content to teach in those courses. So whether it's electronic eavesdropping or personal communication and evaluation, we meet on a regular basis. Our faculty meets with those industry advisors, and we do the same thing in retail management. For example, we have Target and Walmart, large U.S. retail employers, so that we're certain that the program, which has the required courses and the optional courses, as well as the actual course content for key courses, are designed appropriately so that they'll hire our graduates. A MOOC's no different. I mean, a MOOC is a course, and the course is going to be part of our program. The crowdsourcing part, I think, as long as the instructor ultimately is still in charge of the content, then I don't think you'll deviate from having a curriculum that employers will find valuable. I think to the extent that instructor lets the course get out of control, the opposite could happen.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your presentations. Well, I was a little bit involved with this community with MacArthur and others, and I think many in the community have found that MOOCs kind of failed, right? I mean, the founders have acknowledged this themselves. Of course, they have an engineering approach where they say, well, let's try over and over again, only this time there are 1,000 people involved, right? Oops. And and also I was very alarmed by the news in San Francisco of the closure of the largest community college, which served, I don't know how many thousand students, very large, with an argumentation that now there are MOOCs around, right? So in other words, sort of like let the poor population, be educated online, while who needs community colleges. And I mean, I'm like a stern defender of the classroom, and have, a lot of problems with many of the arguments that you brought forward. And so I wonder what you say to people who would argue that this is basically the education for the poor for the next half century, and where the quality stands on that, and how that can be responsible. I feel very emotional about this. Irresponsible.
So I would say I'll look at our MOOC and who came to it. The majority of the participants already have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. So they weren't coming from a place of no education, seeking an education. I think we have to study who are the people that are coming to all the other MOOCs and a population analysis of that. I don't know about San Francisco and the relationship between MOOCs and the community colleges, because that's not the press I heard in the States on why those schools were closed. But I don't see it as educating the poor. I see it as providing a broader base of opportunity to present knowledge or information out there. I don't believe MOOCs are education. We're playing with it, but as Wally said earlier, we have used it as a marketing, reputation, communication. It's a way to be expository of your faculty and the richness that you have there, and to do some creative things that might engage people who might not otherwise. But I do not see it as an alternative for educating the poor.
And I would say that, and this is somewhat digressing from MOOCs and technology, that, at least in the United States, we've done a very poor job of keeping our education affordable. We've been passionate at APUS, but at the same time, our tuition is 20% below the public four-year institutions, but it's not as low as the community colleges in probably, 30 out of the 50 states. But technology was really expensive when we, evolved, and so that wasn't our model to seek cost competitiveness with. Our model to seek competitiveness with was the four-year public institutions, and we are competitive. We're about 20% below. But I think that the irony is that while our politicians talk a good game about access, the funding indicates otherwise. And so when you look at mandated, education's typically been funded by the states in the United States. And so when you look at the state's mandates, it's K through 12 education, and it's Medicaid, which is health care for the poor. And those are the only two primary mandated benefits in most states. Higher education is an elective. And so in times of state budget crisis, they cut back on funding the higher education. And typically the easier way to cut back is to cut back on the community colleges, which aren't viewed as prestigious.
Yes, ma'am.
Two questions, actually. The one is, you were talking about the quality of videos influences the engagement of learners. From your experience, what are criteria of quality? What are
Okay.
criteria of quality for these videos? And then the second is, you showed up the drop of participants over time in an 8-week course. Do you have any experience of, if you use crowdsourcing as a mechanism for those marks, does this decrease the dropout of participants? Does it have anything to do with it or not?
So let me get your first question first, is what is the criteria for the quality of the videos? We have an instructional design team, and the leader of that team shared with me that in a video, traditionally there is a lecturer and it's a talking head. What they did in these videos and some of the criteria, it was documentary, so they had a narrator and they were talking about a variety of experiences and creating an experience using the video rather than just a talking head around a particular objective they hope to accomplish for that lesson. And students, the videos were typically 6 minutes long. Students stayed with them for the full 6 minutes. So it used mythology, so it engaged the imagination. It used theory and practice and into implementation, so there was a multi-level of engagement around the thinking and the dialogue and the experience of which you're in there. I think a lot of the literature on people losing attention every how many seconds, I think some of that might have been included in there as well. The second question?
The second question had to do with the drop-off rate and crowdsourcing.
You want to address it?
Well, I'll start. Instead of using our data, Laura Perna and her colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania published a study about 1 million students who took 16 Penn Coursera courses, and the drop-off rate is virtually the same. So I mean, in our data where we capped our enrollment at 1,400, and we only had 500 and some who actually went into the classroom in week 1, pretty typical. The topic interests a lot of people, but they're busy. And by the way, they're not committing. They're not paying any money for it. It's free. So if I didn't pay any money for it and I'm busy, I'm not going to sign up. But then the drop-off sequentially, if you really want to find some great data, look up the Laura Perna study, and you're going to see that data on 1 million students going through 16 courses.
Cool.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
There are only 2 exceptions I know of to the data set on the drop-off rates. One comes out of UT Austin's energy department, where they created a MOOC on energy, and they had a 48% completion rate on it. The caveat in there was that it was for continuing employment credit, and they had employees from Exxon, Anadarko, and Chevron in it who were getting promotions based off of completion. So they had quite the incentive. So, but they were also adding to the knowledge base. The other place where we are starting to see a little bit of a movement on crowdsourcing, helping with MOOCs, is that there are certain courses being offered, like in programming, back-end languages, development, and coders and back-end guys and women seem to be more adept at participating in MOOCs than their peers in other fields, because a lot of them learn development by going to the community to learn code base with. So it's almost instinctive to them, but you're talking about an extremely tiny subset of the overall population.
Another point, Phil was very good in his talk about bringing out historical antecedents, and this is actually a new name for something people have tried. The National Cash Register Company 90 years ago tried to develop a sort of crowdsourcing using their retail stores and other ways to communicate to get people to come back and forth and talk about products and things. And the American state of Washington on the West Coast in the 1880s attempted to develop a sort of Swiss canton crowdsourcing from people to feed in ideas, and both those schemes eventually pooped. They just simply couldn't keep up an excitement. Now that could that still be with MOOCs?
Yeah, it could very well be that you're seeing something that technology has a very funny way of history repeating itself within technology. And I think that Paul's right, especially you mentioned the canton system, because it's interesting that the founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy, I can't remember his last name, but he actually came up with the idea of Wikipedia after he was in Switzerland and saw the canton system in action, and that was the idea for it, but it morphed into something else. MOOCs, likewise, I think they're a precursor for something larger that's emerging of a lot of technologies coming. I mean, how many of you remember the disaster that was Second Life? Okay, and all the promise it held, but yet we're starting to see things like Sims and things come out of it now that are more usable. So I think that the MOOC is going to be a throwaway, but there are going to be some kernels that come out of it to blend in to what the next generation looks like.
So what you're saying, the answer may be that it's a non-starter. It might not be. I don't know how many of you joined Second Life and got an island, and after a while I said, well, why should I dress up as a dragon to have discussions with people? I mean, you'd get in this amphitheater and you'd have wings, and then you'd feel sort of naked because you hadn't bought enough stuff to wear, and J.P. Morgan bought it. Goldman Sachs had an island. I don't know what Goldman Sachs did on their island, but I mean they had an island. Everybody got an island. It was in Second Life, and it's just. But some of that is going to be usable. But questions, comment? Yes, sir.
Do you just find that people underestimate the effort to complete a MOOC, or just get distracted because completion rates are quite low?
It's skin in the game. It really is. I think somebody needs to do an experiment and take the same exact class offered at different times and charge different amounts of money. At no money, I mean, look, our drop-off rate is the same as the 1 million students in the 16 Penn courses. And quite frankly, adult learners are busy people. We find that out in our regular programs, which is why we give the working adults 10 years to complete a bachelor's degree, which is why we start semesters on the first Monday of every month. some months work great and others don't. But and we also give them a full refund in week number 1, because if they start the course and they say, "Wow, this is too hard for me right now," they can drop it, get their money back. The MOOCs don't work that way; they're totally free, and I think that's why you have that just unbelievable dropout in week number 1.
I'd like to add one other point to it too, is just because they drop out doesn't mean they're not successful. I can tell you there are 7 MOOCs where I'm in the dropout stats on. But I took those MOOCs because there was one or two specific things that I wanted to pick up in each of them. I went in, got exactly what I needed, and then I was out of there and didn't care about the rest of it from there on out. But I picked up the couple of things I needed. So is it really unsuccessful if somebody gets what they need out of it?
Yes, sir.
No, you did a good job outlining some interesting ways that MOOCs could be reshaped. I'm curious if that also brings mobile phones into the picture, and if not, how the mobile technology might change that.
Well, first of all, our MOOC was mobile.
Okay.
So everything that we do in Sakai is available on a tablet or a handheld device of any sort. So the technology for what we offered was already there, and I believe it's true for all of the various groups that have offered a MOOC. Maybe not 100%, but that technology is already there, so people can take it wherever they are. Now, how will that impact it for the future? Who knows? I do believe, as Wally and Phil have said, there's no skin in the game. It's people who are busy lives. I too have signed up for multiple MOOCs, gone in, got what I wanted. Mostly I wanted to see how they were designed, what they were doing. Maybe there was a lesson I was really interested in, and then I checked out, So I'm wondering how many students or participants, I don't even want to call them students, how many participants actually do that as well?
Well, I guess my question is more pedagogical in the sense of, do you see some capabilities of this platform that you don't see that might leverage on the laptop?
Well, actually, the data indicates that fewer and fewer people are using laptops. I have mine
Right.
here, so I'm not criticizing you. And that more and more people are solely accessing the internet through their smart devices, tablets or
Right.
phones. So all of our Sakai initiatives, classroom development, we spent a lot of money for a piece of software called Adobe CQ that automatically sizes it for every device that's out there. And we see it that while as recently as 5 years ago, probably 90% of our students only used a desktop or a laptop, we're pretty certain we're around 50-50 today between smartphones and tablets, and probably the only thing they're using the laptop or the desktop is to do their papers on. They're not writing papers yet, but this guy back here dictates a lot of his emails to me in his smartphone, and I'm sure at some point people will be accustomed to dictating papers. But
The other thing we did is realizing, because as we have expanded and explored international, there are some countries where the individuals only have the handheld device. They don't have the laptops. So about a year and a half ago, we started realizing as we go that way more and more, our faculty need to understand what the students are using in order to create that learning experience. So we held conversations and supported some faculty-driven research around best practices for creating a learning environment using handheld devices, and came up with, we can let people can do quizzes currently, happy to do quizzes, anything that's an objective nature, discussion boards where they can have conversations are actually richer when they use the handheld device and they talk and it gets transferred in versus when they type it in, because there's more dialogue about it. So we have done some studies of it and are trying to figure out how to help faculty teach better in those environments so that students can learn better in those environments. And we're trying to understand from the learners, how are they using it and how would they like to be using it. We still are saying to them, we don't suggest you write a research paper with citations and everything on the handheld device, but I am certain there is someone out there who has or is doing that. There's no doubt in my mind.
I would also say it goes beyond mobile, because whenever you think about mobile, all you're thinking about is a device class, okay? Now, the device class can be this, and how do you even get into it? This thing's almost as big as a tablet. I mean, it's a phablet, okay? So what's the difference between this and a tablet? But more to the point, it's about how you consume information. And I do a lot of productivity work on my laptop or my desktop. I do other stuff on this. But whenever I go home, I also, I hate to admit this, I have two 42-inch web-enabled TVs linked together, powered up, where I can take and I can access the web off it, and I can actually throw stuff from my phone onto the TVs. Just because I just want it to look like Minority Report in my house. If any of you remember that movie. But that's coming. I mean, while I'm doing it right now, and I can do that cost because I've hacked my TVs and so forth. It's coming within 2 to 3 years. That is going to be widespread to where you're going to come home and you have something on your phone that you've seen while you're out, and you just toss it up on your TV to either finish watching a video or reading something on an ultra large scale. So it's more than thinking about mobile, it's thinking about device interaction and technology ecosystems. Glass was a forerunner of that too. Their glass is still somewhat impractical, but Oculus, take a look at Oculus, what's done since Oculus Rift was bought, and now the new generation of Oculus, which actually came out of Second Life, but is a precursor to 3D, which interfaces with all these devices too. I mean, it's the device interaction we have to worry about, not a specific device.
Helen will cut my head off if we don't go to lunch. Thank you for some very good comments. Join me in thanking our panel.